Aliens asked, "Which human is your sniper?" The commander smirked, "Pick any civilian, they don't care." The sky above New Busan had been gray for 3 weeks. Not the gray of clouds or rain, the gray of ash, the gray of buildings that had been standing just a month ago, full of people, full of noise, full of life, and were now nothing but broken walls and dust. The kind of gray that settled into your lungs and reminded you with every breath that the world had changed, that it was never going back to what it was. Commander Kang stood at the edge of the negotiation line and looked out at the ruined city behind him. He did not look sad. He did not look afraid. He looked the way a man looks when he has already made peace with the worst thing imaginable, and is now simply waiting to see what comes next. His uniform was dirty. There was a long scratch across the left side of his face that had not fully healed. His boots were worn down at the heel. He had not slept more than 3 hours in the last 2 days. None of that showed on his face. The Vreth delegation arrived at exactly the time they said they would. That was one thing Kang had learned about them in the weeks since they first appeared in orbit. They were precise. Everything they did was calculated, measured, exact. They did not waste movement. They did not waste words. They landed their shuttle 300 meters from the negotiation table, walked in a straight line across the broken ground, and stopped exactly 2 meters away from where Kang was standing. There were 5 of them. The one in front was the tallest, nearly 3 meters, with gray-green skin that looked like it had been stretched too tight over the bones beneath. Its eyes were wide and flat, like 2 coins pressed into clay. It wore something that might have been armor, or might have been a formal robe. Everything about them looked like it was designed to be intimidating. The tall one placed a small silver device on the folding table between them. A translator. It had taken the Vreth 11 days to build one that worked properly with human languages. Kang had been told this by one of his intelligence people, a quiet young woman named Sora, who had been listening to Vreth communications since the first week. She had a gift for patterns. She had figured out the basic structure of their language before their own translation team had. The tall Vreth, the ambassador or whatever it was, pressed a button on the device. A flat mechanical voice came out of it. "You have been given 3 opportunities to surrender. You have refused all 3. We are here to offer a 4th. It will be the last." Then he looked up at the ambassador's flat coin eyes. "I heard you the first 3 times," he said. The translator hummed for a moment, converting his words. The ambassador's expression did not change. Vreth faces rarely did, from what Kang had seen. They communicated emotion through posture and the subtle movement of the thin membranes along the sides of their necks. Right now, those membranes were completely still. That meant confidence, or something close to it. "Your military has been reduced by 62%, the ambassador said through the device. "Your supply lines are broken. Your government has fragmented. You are holding a position that cannot be held. Surrender is not weakness. It is logic." Kang nodded slowly, as if considering this. Behind the Vreth delegation, parked 300 meters away, their shuttle sat on the cracked pavement like a large silver insect. 2 Vreth soldiers stood at its base, weapons held across their chests. Another 2 stood at the edges of the negotiation perimeter. All of them were watching. All of them were scanning the surrounding area, in the careful, disciplined way soldiers are trained to do. None of them were looking at the old apartment building 400 meters to the northeast. Its windows were mostly blown out. Part of the eastern wall had collapsed. It looked completely abandoned, the kind of building that a sensible person would not go near, let alone climb. The 3rd floor had a section of floor missing. The stairwell above the second landing was open to the sky. But the 6th floor still had most of its structure. And on the 6th floor, in an apartment that had once belonged to a retired civil engineer named Do-hyun, there was a window with a good angle on the negotiation table. Kang did not look at that window. He had not looked at it once since arriving. He was still nodding at the ambassador's words. still wearing that expression of calm consideration, when one of the Vreth soldiers standing at the edge of the perimeter made a short, sharp sound and dropped straight to the ground. It happened without warning, no sound of a shot, no visible impact. The soldier was standing, and then it was not standing, and the whole thing took less than a second. The reaction among the Vreth was immediate and disciplined. The ambassador stepped back. The remaining soldiers raised their weapons and began scanning the surroundings in fast, precise arcs. The ones at the shuttle moved to defensive positions. The translator device fell off the table. Kang did not move. He stood exactly where he had been standing, hands at his sides, watching the Vreth scramble with the same calm expression he had worn since they arrived. He waited for the noise to settle. He waited for the ambassador to look back at him. It took about 40 seconds. When the ambassador's flat eyes turned back to him, Kang could see something in them that had not been there before. Not fear exactly. Something adjacent to it. A crack in the confidence. The ambassador reached down, picked up the translator, and set it back on the table. "Identify your sniper," it said. "Location and rank." Kang looked at the fallen soldier for a moment. Then he looked up, slowly, and let his gaze move across the surrounding area. The ruined buildings, the broken skyline, the empty streets, the open windows, the collapsed rooftops, the dark doorways, the piles of rubble that could hide a person if they were patient and careful and knew what they were doing. There were a lot of places to look. He took his time. Then he looked back at the ambassador, and for the first time since the Vreth delegation had arrived, something changed in his expression. It was not a grin. It was quieter than that. The corner of his mouth moved. His eyes didn't. "Which one?" he said. The ambassador's neck membranes moved for the first time, a slow, rippling motion that Kang had not seen before. He made a note of it. He would ask Sora later what it meant. He had a feeling it meant something like the first cold feeling of a thing you did not expect. The negotiation ended 11 minutes later, with nothing agreed and everything changed. The Vreth delegation walked back to their shuttle in the same straight line they had arrived in, but the precision felt different now. It felt like something people do when they are trying very hard not to look like they are hurrying. Kang watched them go. He did not look at the sixth-floor window. He did not wave. He did not signal. He just turned around and walked back toward the city, hands in his pockets, boots crunching on the broken ground, moving the way a man moves when he has somewhere to be and no particular reason to rush. Behind him, on the sixth floor of the ruined apartment building, a man named Do-hyun unscrewed the suppressor from his rifle, wrapped it carefully in a cloth, and placed it back in the canvas bag he had carried up 6 flights of broken stairs that morning. He was 61 years old. His knees hurt. He had a doctor's appointment next Thursday, assuming, of course, that there was still a Thursday. He zipped the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and started down the stairs. He was thinking about whether he had left the stove on. Aliens asked, "Which human is your sniper?" The commander smirked, "Pick any civilian, they don't care." The drones went in at night. The Vreth sent 17 of them, small, quiet, shaped like flat discs, with sensor arrays on the underside that could read heat signatures through 2 floors of concrete. They came in low, moving between buildings, mapping everything they passed. The Vreth were very good at this kind of reconnaissance. They had done it on 4 other planets before Earth. On those planets, it had told them exactly what they needed to know: where the soldiers were, where the weapons were stored, where the command structure was operating from. On those 4 planets, the pattern had always been the same: military clusters, fortified zones, centralized command, concentrated firepower in specific, identifiable locations. Find the center, break the center, and the resistance collapses. The drones mapped New Busan for 6 hours. When the data came back, The Vreth analysts sat with it for a long time. Then they sat with it some more. Then one of them sent it up the chain of command with a note attached that said, in rough translation, "We may have a problem." There were no military clusters. There were no fortified zones. There was no center. What there was instead was this: a schoolteacher named Yuna, who taught mathematics to 12-year-olds before the invasion, sitting on the floor of her classroom with the desks pushed to the walls. The drone's heat sensor saw her clearly, a warm figure bent over something on the floor. When the image was enhanced, the analyst could see what she was working on. It was a rifle, a long-range precision rifle, the kind that required real knowledge to operate, broken into its component parts and laid out on a cloth with the careful, practiced arrangement of someone who had done this many times. Her hands moved without hesitation. She was not nervous. She was not hurrying. She had the focused, unhurried look of a person doing something they were good at and had no anxiety about. Beneath the classroom floor, under a section of loose boards, the drone's sensors detected a sealed container. The analysts estimated it held enough ammunition for several months of sustained use. 2 blocks west, a retired postal worker named Hyunwoo, 63 years old, broad-shouldered, moving slowly because of a bad hip, was on a rooftop in the dark with a can of paint and a thin brush. He was painting small marks on the surface of the roof. Numbers and lines. Range markers, the analysts realized after a moment. Precise distance indicators laid out to cover every major approach route visible from that elevation. He worked methodically, checking a handwritten notebook before each mark, making sure everything was accurate. When he finished a section, he would stand, look out over the edge, squint slightly, then crouch back down and make 1 or 2 small corrections. He had been doing this, the drone's flight log showed, for 4 nights in a row. Different rooftop each night. 6 streets east of Hyunwoo, in a 3rd-floor apartment with the lights off and the window open 2 centimeters, a girl named Rena sat cross-legged on her bed with a radio set that had been cobbled together from 3 different devices, none of which were originally designed to communicate with each other. She was 17. She had been a high school student before the invasion. She was now something else, something that did not have an easy name. Her voice, when she spoke into the handset, was quiet and completely steady. She was relaying Vreth patrol coordinates. She had been listening to their movement signals for 9 days, and had developed a good enough understanding of their patrol patterns to predict, within a 4-minute window, where any given unit would be at any given time. She did not have the Vreth language. She did not need it. She was tracking movement and timing, reading the rhythm of their patrols the way you read the rhythm of a song, not by understanding the words, but by feeling the beat. She passed the information down a chain that involved 6 other people, none of them soldiers. A man who worked in a bakery before the war, a woman who had been a hospital administrator, an elderly gentleman whose previous occupation was repairing watches. Each one passed the information along, quietly, in short coded phrases that had been agreed on in a meeting that took place in a basement 3 weeks ago. The Vreth drones kept scanning. The more they found, the less sense it made. In a parking structure on the north side of the city, a man named Junho, who had, before the invasion, driven a delivery truck for a logistics company, had converted the 2nd floor into a maintenance and storage space. He was not a trained armorer. He had learned what he needed to learn from manuals, from older people who knew things, and from a great deal of careful trial and error. He could now field strip, clean, and reassemble 7 different types of weapon. He had organized the space with the same systematic logic he had used to optimize delivery routes. Everything had a place, everything was labeled, nothing was wasted. He was currently helping a woman named Mireille re-zero the scope on her rifle. She was still wearing her work clothes. She had come straight from a makeshift medical station 4 blocks away, where she had spent 8 hours treating injuries. She was tired, but her hands on the rifle were steady. and she knew exactly what adjustment she needed. And Junho made it without question and without comment, and she checked it, nodded, said thank you, and left. She had a shift again in 5 hours. The analysts watching the drone footage kept expecting to find the command structure, the place where orders came from, the person or group of people who were coordinating all of this, because it was clearly coordinated. The range markers corresponded to the patrol route information Rena was relaying. The weapons maintenance schedule matched the activity patterns of the shooters the drones had identified. None of this was random. It had a logic to it. But the logic did not come from one place. There was no headquarters. There was no general. There was no nerve center that, if destroyed, would cause the rest to stop. The system ran because everyone in it understood what they were doing and why, and had made their own decision to do it, and kept doing it whether or not anyone told them to. It was organized the way a neighborhood is organized, not because someone drew a map and assigned roles, but because people who live near each other and trust each other figure out, over time, how to function together. One of the Vreth analysts, in her report to the Fleet Command, wrote something that her superior would later describe as the most unsettling sentence she had read in 15 years of military intelligence work. It said, "We cannot find their army because there is no army. There is only a city full of people who have decided not to stop." The report sat on the fleet commander's desk for 2 hours before he responded. His response was one word, also in translation: how. The analyst did not have a good answer. She had a theory, which she included in a follow-up note. The theory was this: on the other 4 planets where the Vreth had conducted operations, the populations had organized their defense around their military. When the military was weakened, the population followed, because they had been structured to follow. They were not trained to fight on their own. They did not have the habit of it. Humans had been preparing civilians for exactly this scenario, not as a government program, not as a top-down initiative, but as a cultural habit that had developed over generations of wars, of occupations, of situations where ordinary people had found themselves with no army to protect them, and had simply, quietly, without fanfare, decided to protect themselves. The guns in Yuna's classroom floor, the paint markers on Hyunwoo's rooftop, Rena's radio, Junho's workshop, Mirei's steady hands. None of them had been ordered to do any of it. All of them had simply done it. The drone footage finished uploading at 4:17 in the morning. The Vreth fleet commander looked at it for a long time. Outside his window, the viewport of his command ship, in orbit above the gray and broken city, the lights of New Busan glittered in the dark like scattered sparks. He had expected a dying city. It did not look like a dying city. It looked like a city that was thinking. Aliens asked, "Which human is your sniper?" The commander smirked. "Pick any civilian, they don't care." The second negotiation was the Vreth's idea. That, by itself, meant something. Commander Kang knew it the moment the request came through, transmitted on the same frequency they had used for the first meeting. In the first meeting, the Vreth had arrived with the slow, easy confidence of people who did not believe they needed to be there, but were showing up as a courtesy, a formality. The kind of meeting you hold not because you think the outcome is uncertain, but because the rules of civilized conduct require you to offer the other side a chance to give up before you finish taking everything from them. This request was different. It came 11 days after the first meeting. It was shorter than expected. And it asked, not demanded, asked, whether Commander Kang would be willing to meet again. Kang read it twice, handed it to Sora, and watched her read it. She had been tracking Vreth communications for long enough that she had developed a feel for the texture of their language, the weight of different words, the way formality shifted when something had changed. "They're nervous," she said, not looking up from the page. "About what specifically?" She folded the paper and handed it back. "About the fact that they don't understand us. Kang nodded. That was what he had thought too. He agreed to the meeting. This time the Vreth brought 6 soldiers instead of 4, and they arranged them in a wider perimeter, scanning rooftops and windows with the methodical attention of people who had been burned once and did not intend to be burned again. The ambassador arrived with a second translator device, as though it was worried the first one might stop working, and set both on the table before sitting down across from Kang. Kang arrived alone, again. He had a cup of coffee, real coffee, which had become genuinely rare in New Busan, and which he had accepted from a woman named Yuna, who ran a supply distribution point out of her school, and somehow kept finding ways to acquire things that no longer existed in any official supply chain. He did not offer any to the ambassador. He drank it slowly and waited for the Vreth to speak first. The ambassador laid out its terms, the same terms as before, more or less. Disarmament, population census, resource extraction rights, and end to resistance. It spoke in the flat, careful way of someone reciting a position they have rehearsed. And Kang listened to all of it the way you listen to a speech you have already read the text of. When it finished, Kang put his coffee down and reached into the bag beside his chair. He took out a sheet of paper, just one, folded in half, and unfolded it and placed it on the table and turned it so the ambassador could see it clearly. It was a map, hand-drawn in pencil, on the back of what appeared to be a flyer for a restaurant that no longer existed. The lines were not perfect, but the information on it was. It showed every Vreth patrol route from the previous 72 hours, every campsite, every communication relay point, every position where Vreth soldiers had stopped for more than 10 minutes. The timing was noted in small numbers beside each location: arrival time, departure time, direction of movement. The level of detail was exact enough that a person looking at it could reconstruct the last 3 days of Vreth ground operations in the area, almost minute by minute. The ambassador looked at the map for a long time without speaking. Its neck membranes moved in the slow, rippling way Kang had seen at the first meeting. He had since asked Sora about that movement. She had thought about it for a moment, and said she believed it indicated something between surprise and recalibration. The Vreth equivalent of stopping to think. Of finding that the ground beneath you is not where you expected it to be. This intelligence, the ambassador said through the translator. Your military collected it. Kang picked up his coffee again. I don't have a military, not in the way you mean. Then who? The man who drew that map, Kang said, is named Hunwoo. Before the invasion, he delivered mail. He has a bad hip, and he doesn't sleep well anyway, so he started going out at night. He has a good memory, and he pays attention to things. He's been watching your patrol routes for 3 weeks. He paused. He also makes very good kimchi. He gave me a jar last week. Would you like the recipe? I can write it on the back of the map if you want. There's space. The ambassador did not respond to the kimchi offer. The communication intercepts, it said. The patrol timing data. That required specialized equipment and training. That was Rena, Kang said. She's 17. She built her radio from parts. She's been listening to your movement frequencies since the 2nd week. She hasn't broken your encryption. She doesn't need to. She tracks timing and direction, and has gotten very good at predicting where any given unit will be within a few minutes. Silence. The range markers, the ambassador said. The neck membranes were moving again. Those indicate organized pre-planned fire positions. Also Hyunwoo, Kang said. He does several things. The ambassador looked at the map again. Then it looked back at Kang. There was something in its wide, flat eyes that was difficult to read. The Vreth face did not express things the way a human face did. But Kang had spent enough time across tables from difficult people to recognize the look of a mind, trying to fit new information into a framework that was not built to hold it. You are telling me, the ambassador said slowly, that this intelligence operation, the surveillance, the signal interception, the route mapping, the range preparation, was conducted entirely by civilians, without military direction. Without any direction, Kang said. They just did it, because it needed doing, and they knew how, and they live here. He let that sit for a moment. That's the thing about people who are defending their home, he said. You don't have to tell them what the stakes are. They already know. And most of them have been quietly preparing for a long time, for the possibility that someday they might need to do exactly this. It's a human habit. We've had a lot of practice. The ambassador turned the map over in its hands. It looked at the restaurant flyer on the other side, a smiling cartoon bowl of noodles, a phone number, a cheerful promise of fast delivery. Then it looked back at the patrol routes, the neat, precise, deadly little numbers in pencil. On every other world we have encountered, it said, resistance has a command structure. We find the structure, we break it. The resistance ends. I know, Kang said. Here we cannot find the structure. That's because it's not a structure, Kang said. It's a habit. You can't break a habit by destroying a headquarters. You'd have to break every single person, and there are a lot of people. He folded his hands on the table and looked at the ambassador with the same calm, unhurried expression he had worn at the first meeting. I don't say that as a threat, he added. I say it because I think you came here today to try to understand what you're dealing with, and I'd rather you understand it clearly than waste both our time on a process that isn't going to end the way you expect. The ambassador was quiet for almost a full minute. Then it said, through the translator, in a tone that the device rendered as flat, but which Kang thought had something different underneath it. If we escalate, if we bring more force won't find the structure either, Kang said. It'll just make more people angry, and angry people with habits like ours are a particular problem. He stood up. He picked up his bag. He looked at the two translator devices sitting on the table. It's good that we can talk. He walked away from the table and back toward the city, alone, the same way he had arrived. The 6 Vreth soldiers watched him go, and none of them moved. The ambassador remained seated, the hand-drawn map still in its hands, looking at the little pencil numbers. Behind a window, on the 2nd floor of a building, 150 meters away, a man named Junho, who had come not because anyone asked him to, but because he liked to keep an eye on things, watched through a scope until Kang was safely back in the streets. Then he packed up, took the stairs down, and went to open the workshop. He had 3 rifles to service before noon. Aliens asked, "Which human is your sniper?" The commander smirked, "Pick any civilian, they don't care." The Vreth were not used to failing. That was the thing that made them dangerous after the second negotiation. Not anger, exactly. The Vreth did not appear to experience anger the way humans did. There was no heat in it, no red-faced shouting, no loss of composure. What they had instead was something colder and more methodical, a kind of locked-in determination that came from a civilization that had never had to adapt its strategy mid-operation before. They had a playbook. The playbook had always worked, and when something did not fit the playbook, their first instinct was not to change the playbook, it was to push harder. So, they pushed harder. They increased patrol frequency in the outer districts of New Busan. They set up signal jamming emitters on the tallest structures they controlled, trying to cut off the communication networks that people like Rena were using. They sent ground teams into buildings to search for weapon caches, moving through apartment by apartment in the systematic, thorough way of people who are very good at finding things. They found some, not as many as they expected. The caches were small and distributed and hidden in places that required either local knowledge or luck to find. Inside walls, beneath floors, inside the kind of ordinary household object that a soldier from another planet would not know to look twice at. They also made a decision about Commander Kang. It was a logical decision, from their perspective. They had tried negotiation. Negotiation had not produced results. They had tried intelligence operations. Their intelligence operations have been answered by better intelligence operations conducted by a retired postal worker with bad knees. They had tried increased pressure. The city had absorbed the pressure and kept functioning. The one consistent element in the human resistance, the one visible, identifiable, named target, was Kang. Remove Kang, and even if the resistance continued, it would at minimum be disrupted. There would be confusion, a gap, and in that gap, perhaps, something could be done. They had a very good sniper. His name, in the Vreth language, was something that translated approximately as 8th of the Silent Division. He had completed 41 confirmed operations on 3 planets. He had never missed a target within his effective range. He was patient, precise, and entirely without sentiment. He was exactly the kind of tool you reach for when you have decided that the conversation is over. They positioned him 3 kilometers from the location where Kang was scheduled to deliver a public address to the residents of the Western District. It was a small event. Just Kang standing in a cleared square, updating the people of the area on the situation, answering questions, being visible and steady and present in the way that leaders sometimes need to be during hard times. The Vreth had known about it for 36 hours. They had spent that time preparing. 8th of the Silent Division found his position in a building the Vreth controlled on the northern approach. He set up carefully. He measured the wind. He calculated the environmental factors. He verified his range data twice. He had a clean line of sight to the square where Kang would stand. The distance was within his optimal operating range. The shot was, by any professional assessment, straightforward. He waited for Kang to step into position. When Kang did, 8th of the Silent Division aligned his shot with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this many times and had no doubt about the outcome. He squeezed the trigger. The round traveled approximately 40 meters before it was struck by another round coming from a slightly different angle, from a building on the 14th floor, 500 meters to the west. The physics of what happened next were simple enough. 2 rounds meeting in flight. The Vreth round deflected. The deflection was not perfect. The shot went wide and struck the concrete wall of a building behind the square, leaving a small white scar in the surface. No one was hurt. Kang did not flinch, because Kang did not know a shot had been fired. He was mid-sentence, explaining the water distribution schedule for the following week, and he finished the sentence and went on to the next one. The Vreth analysts, reviewing the data afterward, spent a long time trying to understand what had happened. The trajectory data was clear. The timing was clear. A second round had been fired from the west, from the 14th floor of a residential building, at almost exactly the same moment as their sniper shot, from a position and angle that had intercepted the Vreth round mid-flight. The probability of this being a coincidence was essentially 0. They sent a team to the building. The team climbed to the 14th floor, moving carefully, weapons ready, alert for any sign of a military presence. What they found on the 14th floor was a long hallway of apartments, most of them still lived in, with doors closed, and the ordinary sounds of people going about their day filtering through the walls. The apartment at the end of the hall, the one whose window angle, according to their calculations, corresponded to the shot, had its door closed. There was light under the door. The smell of food cooking was coming from inside. They knocked. After a moment, the door opened. The woman who answered it was in her mid-30s. She was wearing the practical, slightly worn clothes of someone who had just gotten home from a long shift. Her hair was tied back in the efficient way of a person who needed it out of the way for work. She looked at the Vreth soldiers in the hallway with the calm, slightly tired expression of someone who had seen difficult things that day, and was not particularly surprised to encounter more of them. Her name was Mireille. She was a nurse. She had spent the last 8 hours at a medical station 4 blocks away, treating injuries of various kinds, doing what nurses do, which is to say everything that needs doing, and then some. She had come home 40 minutes ago. The Vreth soldiers looked past her into the apartment. They could see a kitchen, a small table, a half-eaten bowl of rice. A window on the far wall was open a few centimeters. On the counter next to the stove, there was a rifle case, closed, latched. One of the soldiers pointed at the case and said something in Vreth. Mireille looked at the case. Then she looked back at the soldiers. Her expression did not change. "Yes," she said. The translator drone one of the soldiers was carrying rendered her word into their language with flat mechanical accuracy. They asked how long she had been shooting. 8 years, she said. I started as a hobby. There is a range 20 minutes from here. Was a range. Before you came. They asked if she was military. No, she said. They asked who had given her orders to fire. She looked at them for a moment, with the expression of someone who has been asked a question that doesn't quite make sense. Nobody, she said. I saw the angle. I understood what it meant, so I took the shot. She paused. Is there something else you need? My rice is getting cold. The Vreth soldiers stood in the hallway for a moment longer. Then they left. They did not arrest her, partly because the legal framework they were operating under did not clearly cover the situation of a civilian nurse who had, apparently on her own initiative, intercepted a precision military shot with what appeared to be a hobby rifle from 8 years of weekend practice. And partly because something in the encounter had produced in the lead soldier a feeling he could not immediately name. A feeling that arresting this particular woman, in this particular hallway, would somehow make things worse in a way he was not equipped to calculate. He filed his report. He described what he had found. He noted that the woman had returned to her apartment after the soldiers left, and that sounds consistent with cooking and eating had resumed within approximately 90 seconds. His report reached the fleet commander at the same time as 8th of the Silent Division's own report, which was brief and contained a phrase that, translated, meant roughly, I have no explanation for what occurred. The fleet commander set both reports down and looked at his viewport for a long time. Below him, the lights of New Busan glittered in the dark. His best operative had been undone by a nurse with a hobby and a window. He had a feeling, and it was the kind of feeling he had learned, over a long career, to take seriously, that this was not going to be the last time something like this happened. That the city below him contained, in its apartments and its basements and its ruined streets, an essentially uncountable number of people like Mireille. People with 8 years of weekend practice. People who had looked at an angle and understood what it meant, and acted on that understanding without being told to, without asking permission, without any of the organizational scaffolding that the Vreth had always assumed was necessary for this kind of action to occur. He did not know what to do with that feeling. He put it in a file. He labeled the file with a phrase that, translated, meant roughly, the problem we do not know how to solve. He had a lot of files like that, lately. All of them were about Earth. Aliens asked, which human is your sniper? The commander smirked, pick any civilian, they don't care. The Vreth High Command met in an emergency session 22 days after the second negotiation. It was not a small meeting. 17 senior commanders were present, representing every major branch of Vreth military and administrative authority. They met in orbit above Earth, in the largest conference room of the fleet flagship, and they sat around a table that was long and polished and very serious looking. The kind of table that is designed to make the people sitting at it feel like what they are doing matters, which it did. It just was not going the way they had expected. The session lasted 9 hours. The analysts presented everything: the drone footage from New Busan, the patrol maps drawn by a retired postal worker, the intercepted communications tracked by a 17-year-old girl with a cobbled-together radio, the workshop in the parking structure, the nurse on the 14th floor, the shot that should not have been possible and it happened anyway, the intelligence operation that had no headquarters, the resistance that had no command structure, the city that kept functioning no matter what was done to it. Not because someone was ordering it to function, but because the people in it had decided they were going to function and were doing it themselves. The commanders looked at all of it. They asked questions. The analysts answered as well as they could, which was not always well, because some of the questions did not have clear answers. One commander, older than the rest, with the worn, careful look of someone who had been making difficult decisions for a long time, asked the question that cut to the center of it. "If we escalate further," he said, "if we bring maximum force to bear, is there a point at which the resistance stops?" The lead analyst was quiet for a moment. "Not in the way we have historically defined that point," she said finally. "On the other 4 planets, maximum force created a threshold. Cross the threshold, and the organized resistance collapses, because the structure holding it together collapses. Here," she paused. She had been trying to find the right way to say this for 3 days. "Here there is no threshold we can reach that would not require us to destroy the population entirely. Because the resistance is the population. They are not 2 separate things." Silence around the long, serious table. "That is not an option we can pursue," another commander said. It was not a statement of compassion. It was a statement of politics. Total elimination of a planetary population was the kind of thing that other civilizations noticed. That had consequences. That closed doors the Vreth were not yet ready to close. "Then what are our options?" the first commander asked. Nobody answered for a while. This was the meeting where the Vreth High Command, for the first time in the history of their expansion across 4 planetary systems, could not produce a clear answer to that question. They had options. They just did not have good ones. They could continue the current operation and absorb the ongoing cost of a resistance that would not reduce. They could escalate in targeted ways and absorb the political cost of doing so. They could withdraw. Withdrawal was a word that did not exist in the Vret's strategic vocabulary. Not because it was forbidden, but because it had never come up. In 4 previous operations, it had never been necessary. Things had always resolved. The structure had always broken. The population had always, eventually, become manageable. The word sat in the room like an unfamiliar piece of furniture. Everyone could see it. Nobody wanted to be the first to point at it. It was the older commander who finally did. "We need more information," he said. "We should ask their commander directly. One final communication. Ask him to identify his strategic assets, his key personnel, his command structure. If there is a structure, that information will tell us. If there is not." He didn't need to. The message was drafted that afternoon and transmitted to Commander Kang's frequency. Kang received it in the basement of a building that was being used as a coordination point. Not a headquarters, because there was no headquarters, but a place where people came to share information and solve problems, which was a different thing. He read it aloud to the people in the room. There were 8 of them. Sora was there. Junho was there. An older man named Do-hyun, who had been climbing ruined stairwells and watching negotiation tables through scopes. A teenager who smelled like solder because she had been working on radio equipment all morning. The message asked Kang to identify his top military asset, the person or persons most critical to the Resistance's operation. Their names, their ranks, their locations. Junho started laughing first. It was the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere genuine. Not performance, not bravado, but actual surprised delight at the gap between what someone expected and what the reality was. The kind of laugh that is also a little bit sad, because it means whoever you are laughing at genuinely does not understand something that seems obvious to you. Sora covered her mouth. Do-hyun made a sound somewhere between a cough and a chuckle. The teenager blinked and then grinned. Kang waited for the room to settle. Then he sat down at the table and pulled a piece of paper toward him. He wrote 3 sentences. He read them back to himself once, changed a word, read them again. Then he folded the paper and handed it to Sora to transmit. The message said, "We don't have one. Every person you can see is the asset. We suggest you leave before you meet all of them." The response from the Vreth fleet took 4 hours. In those 4 hours, Kang did not wait by the transmitter. He went and helped with the water distribution, because the schedule Sora had put together was good, but the logistics of actually moving the water from the collection points to the neighborhoods required physical labor, and there were not enough people doing it. He carried containers for 2 hours. He was not asked to. He just picked them up and started moving. When the response came, Sora found him in the Western District and handed him a transcription without saying anything. He read it. The Vreth fleet would begin a withdrawal from New Busan within 6 hours. Conditions for withdrawal were attached. They were, compared to the terms the Vreth had been offering at the start, very mild. There was no demand for disarmament, no demand for census or resource rights. There was a request for safe passage for their ground forces as they pulled back to extraction points. The word request was used, where at the start they would have said requirement. Kang read the conditions twice. Then he folded the transcription and put it in his pocket, and stood very still for a moment, looking at the street around him. The broken buildings, the gray dust, the people moving back and forth with their containers of water, doing the work that needed doing, the same way they had been doing it for weeks. He thought about Do-hyun and his bad hip and the paint marks on the rooftops. He thought about Rena sitting in the dark with her radio, tracking movement patterns with the patient attention of someone who had found something she was genuinely good at and was applying it where it mattered. He thought about Mireille going back to her rice. He thought about Junho's workshop, the careful labels, the 7 types of weapon, the organized logic of a man who had spent his life moving things from one place to another efficiently and had simply redirected that skill. He thought about all the other people he did not know by name, and there were thousands of them, tens of thousands, who had made the same quiet decision, who had looked at the situation and said, without drama, without ceremony, "This is my home, and I will not let it be taken," and had then gone and done what they could with what they had. The Vreth had come looking for an army. They had found something harder to defeat than an army. They had found a city that had decided to be an army, quietly and without announcement, because that was what the moment required, and humans, when pushed to the edge of something, have a very particular way of responding. Not by looking for someone to lead them, not by waiting for permission, but by looking at what needs to be done and doing it. Kang took the transcription out of his pocket and unfolded it again. He wrote one word at the bottom, beneath the Vreth's conditions, in the space at the end. The word was, "Agreed." He folded it back up, walked to the transmitter station, and handed it to Sora. 6 hours later, the Vreth ground forces in New Busan began moving toward their extraction points. They moved in orderly columns, weapons down, making no sudden movements, following the agreed routes. People watched from windows and doorways. Nobody stopped them. Nobody fired. Do-hyun watched from a rooftop for a while. Then he went downstairs. Rena turned off her radio for the first time in weeks. The silence in the room felt strange. She sat with it for a few minutes. Then she made tea. Mireille was already at the medical station. There was a lot of work to do. There was always a lot of work to do. She did it the same way she had been doing it. Steadily, without drama, one thing at a time. Commander Kang stood in the square where he had been standing when the shot that never landed had left a white scar on the wall behind him. He stood there for a while and looked at the city. The gray dust, the broken walls, the lights coming on in windows as evening fell. The sound of people moving and talking and doing the ordinary things that ordinary life requires. It did not look like victory. Victory, Kang had always thought, was supposed to look like something, a moment, a clear before and after. This just looked like a city. A damaged city. A tired city. A city that had lost things it would not get back. But a city that was still there. Still lit. Still moving. Still, unmistakably, itself. He put his hands in his pockets and walked back through the streets in the gathering dark, and the city went on around him the way it always had, the way it had always intended to. Vreth Post-Conflict Analysis, Classified, Year 1 AC, After Contact. We searched for their greatest weapon. We found it everywhere, in the nurse, the old man, the girl with the radio, the mechanic. We had no answer for a people who did not wait to be told to fight, who simply fought, because it was their home, and they had decided it would remain so. There is no tactical solution to a decision that lives inside every person.